The firelight flickered across Ethan's face as he sat on a rough log, stretching his sore legs after a long day's travel. Around him, alien warriors moved about the camp, some sharpening weapons, others laughing in groups near the larger fires. Lyra, the young alien woman who had been assigned as his guide, sat beside him, her bright eyes reflecting the flames. They had been teasing each other over the strange taste of the alien stew when she leaned closer without warning. Before Ethan could react, he felt a quick, sharp pressure on his shoulder, Lyra's teeth pressing into his skin. He flinched back with a startled laugh. "Ouch, that hurt," he said, rubbing the spot. To him, it was nothing more than playful mischief. But the laughter around the camp died instantly. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The crackle of the fire seemed louder in the sudden silence. Ethan looked up, confused, as every alien in sight turned toward them, their eyes wide, their expressions a mix of shock and something far more serious. A tall, older alien stepped forward from the shadows. His skin was pale silver, his presence commanding. "Do you even understand what she just did to you?" he asked, his deep voice carrying through the hushed camp. Ethan shrugged lightly. "She bit me. Yeah, it stung a little, but..." The elder cut him off. "That bite is not a game. It is a claim. In our culture, when a female marks a male with her teeth, it is a public declaration. She has chosen you as her life mate." Ethan blinked, thinking this had to be some strange joke. "You're kidding, right?" But no one laughed. The camp remained silent, the firelight throwing long, tense shadows. Lyra's head was lowered, her cheeks faintly glowing with the soft blue blush of her kind. She didn't speak, but her body language told him this was no prank. The elder's voice hardened. "By our laws, you must now prove you are worthy of her bond. You will undergo the proving trials. If you succeed, the bond is sealed. If you fail, both of you will face the punishment." Ethan's chest tightened. "Punishment? What kind of punishment?" The elder met his eyes without hesitation. "Exile, or death." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. From the back, a large warrior stepped forward, green-scaled, broad-shouldered, his expression full of hostility. Ethan had noticed him earlier, always watching Lyra. Now the warrior sneered. "The human will never survive the trials. Better to end this farce now." The elder ignored him, striking his staff against the ground with a dull thud. "At dawn, the trials begin. Prepare yourself, human." The crowd slowly broke apart, though many glanced back at Ethan as they left. Lyra stayed where she was, her hands twisting together nervously. Ethan turned to her, lowering his voice. "You knew what that bite meant?" Her eyes lifted to his, full of guilt. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought humans wouldn't take it seriously. I thought it would just be between us." "Well," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "they definitely took it seriously." From across the camp, the green-scaled warrior still stood, glaring at Ethan with pure dislike. Lyra's gaze flicked toward him. "That's Varek. He wanted the elders to choose him for me. Now, you've taken that place." Ethan exhaled slowly, glancing toward the dark forest that loomed beyond the camp. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a few words. This was a challenge, one that could cost him his life. He wasn't sure yet what these trials involved, but he understood one thing clearly. The bite had changed everything, and there was no way back to how things were before. Ethan sat on a flat stone, rubbing the spot where Lyra's teeth had grazed him. It had been a quick, playful nip, something that might happen in a moment of teasing between friends. He still smiled about it, thinking it was just part of her strange sense of humor. But around them, the atmosphere in the alien camp was different. The laughter and casual chatter had faded. Eyes were staring at him from every direction, some wide in surprise, others narrowed in anger. Even the guards at the edge of the firelight stood stiff, whispering in low voices. One of the older alien men stepped forward. His skin was a pale silver, and his voice carried the weight of authority. "Human," he said, his tone sharp, "do you even understand what she just did to you?" Ethan tilted his head. "She bit me," he replied, still not seeing the problem. "I mean, yeah, it hurt a little, but..." The alien elder cut him off with a deep growl. "That bite is not a game. Among our people, when a female marks a male with her teeth, it is a claim. It is a vow. It means you are hers for life." Ethan blinked, trying to laugh it off. "You're kidding." But the elder's expression didn't change. No one in the circle laughed. Lyra stood a few steps behind him, her eyes darting to the ground, cheeks faintly glowing with the faint blue blush of her kind. It was the first time Ethan had ever seen her nervous. "This isn't funny," the elder continued. "By our law, you must now prove you are worthy of her bond. If you fail, both of you will be punished." Ethan frowned, glancing over his shoulder at Lyra. "What kind of punishment are we talking about?" "Exile. Or death," the elder said simply. The words sank into Ethan's mind like cold water. He turned back to Lyra, waiting for her to explain. She looked up at him slowly, her voice quiet. "I didn't mean to. I thought humans wouldn't take it seriously. It was supposed to be just playful." "That's not helping," Ethan muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Around them, whispers spread through the alien soldiers. Some looked at Ethan with curiosity, others with disgust, as if an unworthy outsider had stumbled into a sacred tradition. A tall warrior with deep green scales stepped forward, eyes glinting. If he is to claim her, he must face the proving trials. No outsider has ever passed them. Ethan's stomach twisted. Proving trials? What is this? Some kind of gladiator thing? The green-scaled warrior sneered. "It is the way we measure strength, skill, and spirit. A male who cannot pass is no mate at all." The elder nodded gravely. 3 trials. You survive them. You may stand beside her. You fail, and the bond is broken. In the only way it can be broken. His eyes flickered with meaning, and Ethan realized they meant killing them both. He turned back to Lyra again. "And you're okay with this?" Lyra shook her head quickly. "No, Ethan, I didn't think this would happen. I thought it would just be between us. I didn't think anyone saw." "They saw," Ethan said, gesturing to the dozens of eyes on them. The elder raised his staff and struck the ground once. The sound echoed through the camp. "It is decided. At dawn, the human begins the trials." Ethan exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He had fought in combat zones before, survived enemy ambushes, but this was different. Here, the rules were alien. Here, survival wasn't just about strength. It was about understanding a culture he barely knew. The crowd began to disperse, though not without throwing glances back at him. The green-scaled warrior lingered, glaring at Ethan like a predator watching prey. "Don't bother showing up, human. I'll make sure you fail before the first test ends." Then he walked away into the shadows. Ethan clenched his jaw. Friendly bunch, aren't they? Lyra stepped closer, her voice low. "He's dangerous. He's been trying to get the elders to match me with him for years." Ethan gave a short laugh. "And now he hates me because you bit me?" She nodded, her lips pressed tight. "You are in his way now. And in our culture, there is no greater insult than a bond stolen by an outsider." Ethan looked at her, seeing for the first time just how serious this was. The bite wasn't just a joke. It was a spark in a forest of dry leaves, and it had already set something burning. Night fell heavier, the campfires dimming. Ethan sat alone for a while, staring at the alien stars above. Somewhere beyond those lights was Earth, where flirting didn't usually end in combat trials or death sentences. Here, one small misunderstanding had turned into a fight for survival. He thought about walking away, maybe sneaking out before dawn. But Lyra's face came back to him, those worried eyes, that small voice admitting she hadn't meant to start this. If he left, she'd pay the price too. And Ethan had never been the kind of man to walk away when someone needed him, especially when they were in danger because of him. He stood up, glancing toward the forest where his first trial would likely take place. He didn't know what was waiting for him out there, but one thing was certain. He was going to have to learn their rules fast, and maybe break a few along the way. Far in the shadows, Lyra watched him, her hands clenched. She knew the trials would test more than his body. They would test his will, his mind, and his heart. She also knew that if he failed, she wouldn't let them kill him, even if it meant betraying her own people. Neither of them said it aloud, but both understood the truth. The playful bite had changed everything, and there was no going back. The first trial began at sunrise. The camp was quiet, except for the low hum of alien drums in the distance. Ethan stood at the edge of the forest, the air thick with mist. The alien elder raised his staff and pointed toward the dark trees. "You have until nightfall," he said. "Survive." That was all the instruction Ethan got. No weapons, no map, no supplies, just the clothes on his back. He glanced at Lyra, who stood far behind the crowd. Her eyes met his for a moment, worry clear on her face, before she quickly looked away. Ethan stepped into the forest, the sound of the camp fading behind him. The air smelled damp and earthy, and the thick canopy above blocked most of the sunlight. He moved carefully, scanning the ground for tracks or signs of danger. Every step made the leaves crunch softly under his boots, but in the distance, he could hear something heavier moving, slow, deliberate, as if it was following him. He kept going, deeper into the forest, until he found a small clearing. Kneeling down, he touched the ground and found claw marks in the dirt, long, deep grooves like something had dragged its talons there recently. He stood up slowly, his senses on high alert. A sudden snap of a branch made him turn sharply. From the shadows emerged a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was large, almost as tall as him, its skin covered in dark fur and its mouth filled with jagged teeth. It moved low to the ground, its eyes locked on him. Ethan didn't have the brute strength to fight something like this head-on. Instead, he backed away slowly, scanning for anything he could use. His gaze fell on a fallen tree nearby. The trunk was hollow, and the space around it was littered with dry branches. An idea began to form. He moved toward the tree, keeping the creature in sight. As it stalked forward, he grabbed the dry branches and shoved them into the hollow trunk. Then, pulling a lighter from his pocket, something the aliens had not thought to take, he sparked the dry wood. Smoke began to pour from the trunk, filling the clearing with a thick haze. The creature growled and hesitated, its nose twitching. Ethan began to wave his arms and shout loudly, moving side to side to confuse it. The smoke grew thicker, and finally, with a frustrated roar, the creature turned and disappeared into the shadows. Ethan exhaled in relief. He hadn't killed it, but he had driven it away without risking a direct fight. That, he figured, was a win. He didn't realize he was being watched. High above in the trees, hidden in the shadows, Lyra clung to a branch, her eyes fixed on him. She had followed him into the forest, silently watching to see how he handled himself. She expected him to try to fight the beast like most males of her species would. But instead, he had outsmarted it. She felt a small spark of pride. Maybe this human had a chance after all. But someone else was watching too. From behind a thick tree trunk, the green-scaled warrior Varek narrowed his eyes. He had been waiting for the perfect moment to sabotage Ethan. Now he saw his chance. Ethan moved on, not knowing Varek was behind him. He found a narrow stream and knelt to drink, cupping the cool water in his hands. That was when he heard the faint swish of something slicing through the air. Instinct made him duck, and a sharpened spearhead flew past his head, embedding itself in a tree. Ethan rolled to the side, his hand reaching for a thick branch to use as a weapon. Varek stepped out from behind a tree, holding another spear, his expression twisted with a cruel smile. "You won't make it to nightfall, human," he said. Ethan tightened his grip on the branch. "I'm starting to think you're not here to cheer me on." Varek lunged forward, swinging the spear. Ethan sidestepped, using the branch to block. The impact jarred his arms, but he held his ground. He knew he couldn't overpower Varek in strength, so he aimed for timing. When Varek lunged again, Ethan twisted, letting the spear pass close, then used the branch to sweep Varek's legs out from under him. The alien crashed to the ground with a growl, but instead of finishing the fight, Ethan stepped back, breathing hard. "I don't need to kill you to prove anything," he said. Varek glared up at him, humiliated. "You'll regret sparing me." Ethan turned away, moving back toward the path through the trees. He knew Varek wasn't done, but there was no point wasting his energy now. By midday, the sun barely broke through the leaves, and the air grew hotter. Ethan found a rocky ridge and climbed it, hoping for a better view. From the top, he saw the forest stretching endlessly, with no sign of the camp. The elder hadn't said where he needed to go, just to survive until nightfall. That meant staying away from threats, finding shelter, and conserving his energy. He found a narrow cave in the ridge and decided it was as good a place as any to wait. Using vines and branches, he set a crude trap at the entrance, a trip line tied to a branch with sharp stones. If anything tried to enter, it would make noise and give him time to react. The day dragged on. He dozed lightly, waking at every sound, ready to defend himself. Once, he heard the roar of the same creature from before, but it never came close. Another time, the faint crunch of footsteps made him tense, but it passed without incident. Finally, as the sun dipped and the shadows grew long, Ethan emerged from the cave. He had made it through the day without serious injury, and the sound of the drums returned in the distance, a signal that the trial was over. When he reached the edge of the forest, the alien crowd was waiting. The elder studied him, then gave a single nod. "You live. The first trial is complete." Lyra's shoulders visibly relaxed. She gave him the faintest smile, one only he seemed to notice. But behind the crowd, Varric stood with narrowed eyes, silent but seething. Ethan knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The camp was restless that night. Fires burned low, casting long shadows on the alien tents. Ethan sat near one of the smaller flames, sharpening a piece of wood into a spear. His muscles ached from the day's trial, but he felt a quiet pride. He had survived. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. It didn't take long for that feeling to turn real. Varric, the green-scaled warrior, stepped out of the shadows. His tall frame blocked the firelight, and the gleam in his eyes told Ethan this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. Around them, a few alien soldiers looked up from their meals, sensing something about to happen. Varric's voice was loud enough for the whole camp to hear. Surviving the forest was luck, human. But strength cannot be faked. I challenge you. Here. Now. A hush fell over the camp. Ethan knew enough about alien culture by now to understand what this meant. A public challenge couldn't be ignored. If he refused, it would be seen as weakness, and weakness was as good as losing. Ethan rose slowly, planting the sharpened stick into the ground. "If this is about Lyra, this is about proving you're not worthy of her bite," Varric interrupted. "If you lose, you walk away, forever." Ethan looked around. Dozens of alien eyes were locked on him. Lyra stood near the elder, her hands clenched tight. She didn't speak, but her expression begged him to be careful. The elder stepped forward, raising his staff. "This is a sanctioned challenge. It ends when one cannot continue." The circle formed quickly, soldiers and civilians pushing in to watch. The ground beneath Ethan's boots felt uneven, the dirt loose. He knew Varric had the advantage in size, strength, and experience with alien combat. But he also knew brute force wasn't his game. Timing and speed would have to be his weapons. Varric lunged first, moving faster than Ethan expected for his size. The alien's clawed hand swiped toward his head, but Ethan ducked, feeling the rush of air as the claws missed by inches. He stepped back, keeping his guard up. The second strike came lower, aimed at his legs. Ethan jumped sideways, using the momentum to grab a handful of dirt and fling it toward Varric's eyes. The alien growled, momentarily blinded, but didn't slow. He swung again, and this time his fist grazed Ethan's ribs, sending a sharp pain shooting through his side. The crowd roared in excitement. To them, this was entertainment. Ethan staggered back, forcing himself to breathe through the ache. He needed a way to turn Varric's strength into a weakness. As Varric charged again, Ethan sidestepped at the last second, letting the alien's own momentum carry him forward. With a quick pivot, Ethan kicked at the back of Varric's knee. The alien stumbled, but didn't fall. "You fight like prey," Varric snarled, spinning around. "And you think like a rock." Ethan shot back, his voice calm. That taunt worked. Varric's anger flared, and he came at Ethan with everything he had. Big, heavy swings that were powerful but less controlled. Ethan kept moving, dodging each blow, letting the alien tire himself out. His breathing was still steady, while Varric's was growing heavier. Finally, Ethan saw his opening. As Varric swung again, Ethan caught his arm, dropped low, and used his weight to throw the alien over his shoulder. The ground shook as Varric hit the dirt. The crowd gasped, but Varric wasn't finished. He rolled and was back on his feet in seconds. This time, Ethan didn't wait. He rushed forward, aiming a sharp elbow to Varric's chest. The hit landed, pushing the alien back a step. Ethan followed with a quick strike to the side of his head, not enough to injure seriously, but enough to disorient him. Varric's legs wavered. Ethan stepped in close, pressing the sharpened stick against the alien's throat. "I'm not here to steal her," he said firmly, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "But I won't be pushed away either." The elder raised his staff again. "Enough. The challenge is decided." Ethan stepped back, lowering the stick. Varric glared at him, his pride clearly wounded, but he didn't speak. The crowd slowly began to disperse, some murmuring in surprise that the human had held his own. Lyra approached cautiously. "You didn't have to fight him," she said, her voice quiet. Ethan gave a small, tired smile. If I hadn't, you'd be explaining to them why your chosen mate was too scared to stand up for himself. She looked away at the word mate, her cheeks glowing faintly again. You fought well, she admitted. Not like them, but well. He shrugged. I'm not them. That night, the camp was quieter than usual. Varric kept his distance, but Ethan knew this victory wouldn't end things. The trials weren't over, and there was no telling what came next. He sat by the fire again, watching the flames, feeling the weight of every eye that would be on him tomorrow. From across the camp, Lyra glanced at him one last time before disappearing into her tent. In her mind, the fight had changed something. Ethan wasn't just surviving the trials anymore. He was starting to earn a place in her people's eyes and in her own heart. The next morning, the camp buzzed with whispers. Ethan could feel eyes following him wherever he went. He had survived the first trial in the forest and stood his ground against Varric in the challenge. But now, there was a tension in the air, something heavier than before. Even Lyra avoided meeting his eyes for too long, as if she was holding back a secret. After breakfast, the elder called everyone to gather in the central square. The crowd formed quickly, warriors standing tall, civilians leaning forward in curiosity. Ethan stood near the front, trying to read the elder's expression. The old alien's voice carried over the crowd. The final trial will decide everything. This is not about strength or survival in the wild. This is about the bond. Ethan frowned. The bond? The elder's eyes locked on him. When a female claims a male, the last step is the binding rite. Without it, the bond is incomplete. It is intimate, sacred, and dangerous if broken. A low murmur spread through the crowd. Some looked eager, others looked uncomfortable. Lyra's cheeks flushed a faint blue, and she shifted her weight, avoiding Ethan's gaze. He could tell she knew exactly what this meant, and she wasn't ready to say it aloud. The elder continued, his tone heavy with tradition. At sunset, you will enter the binding chamber. If you refuse, the bond will be nullified, and both will face the consequences. If you accept, you must complete the rite in the presence of the guardians. Ethan's mind raced. He didn't know exactly what the rite involved, but the way everyone reacted told him it wasn't something small. And if I fail? He asked. The elder's eyes narrowed. Then you will not leave this place alive, nor will she. For a moment, Ethan didn't speak. The forest trial had tested his survival skills. The fight with Varric had tested his combat ability. But this was something else entirely. It wasn't about skill or strength. It was about stepping into a tradition he didn't understand, one that could cost them both their lives. After the gathering, Lyra walked with him away from the crowd. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't mean for it to go this far. When I bit you, I thought it would be harmless. But once the elders saw it... She trailed off. Ethan stopped and looked at her. You know what this binding rite is, don't you? She hesitated before nodding. It's a joining. In our culture, it's the final step that makes the bond unbreakable. It's private, but here it must be witnessed to be valid. He raised an eyebrow. Witnessed? As in, other people in the room? Her eyes flicked away. Guardians. They make sure it's done according to tradition. It's not like human weddings. It's physical. It's proof. Ethan stared at her, processing her words. So you're telling me the only way to keep us both alive is to... She interrupted quickly. I'm telling you it's not fair to force you into this. But if you walk away, they'll kill us. That's the law. Ethan exhaled slowly, his mind turning over every possible escape plan. But the camp was guarded. The forest beyond was filled with predators. And now the whole tribe expected him to see this through. By midday, the binding chamber was prepared. It was a circular tent made from thick woven fabric that blocked most of the light. Strange patterns were painted across the walls, symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim glow. Ethan noticed a small platform in the center, surrounded by cushions and bowls of burning herbs that filled the air with a warm, sweet scent. The guardians arrived first, 2 older warriors, their faces stern, their eyes sharp. They said nothing, simply standing on either side of the entrance. Lyra entered a few minutes later, dressed in ceremonial robes that shimmered in the light. Her usual confident posture was gone. She looked nervous, her fingers tightening around the edge of her sleeve. Ethan stepped inside, the heavy air making it feel warmer than outside. The elder's voice carried from just beyond the entrance. Once you begin, there is no turning back. If the bond is not sealed, You will not leave alive. The Guardians motioned for them to approach the platform. Lyra took a slow step forward, then another, until she was standing in front of Ethan. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't want you to think I'm forcing you, but if you choose not to, it will be the end for both of us. Ethan looked into her eyes and saw fear, but also trust. She wasn't the one demanding this. She was trapped in it just like he was. Slowly, he reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. Then we make it through, on our terms. The Guardians exchanged a glance, as if silently judging his words. The Elder's voice came again from outside. Begin. Ethan didn't know all the steps of the ritual, but Lyra guided him. She touched her forehead to his, their hands clasping together in a way that made the symbols on the walls glow brighter. The air seemed to hum, and the scent of the herbs grew stronger. It was more than physical. It felt like the air itself was pressing in, watching them. At one point, Lyra leaned in close, her lips near his ear. Whatever happens, don't pull away, she whispered. They'll see it as rejection. He nodded slightly. Got it. The rite went on, a strange mix of physical closeness, whispered vows in her language, and symbolic gestures that Ethan barely understood but followed anyway. By the time it was nearly over, the glow of the walls had spread across the floor, wrapping them in light. Finally, Lyra pressed her teeth gently against his neck, not biting to hurt this time, but marking him again. The Guardians nodded once, and the Elder's voice called from outside. It is sealed. Ethan stepped back, feeling the weight of the moment settle on him. Lyra's cheeks were still faintly glowing, her expression unreadable. The Guardians left without a word, but the tension in the camp had shifted. Now, wherever Ethan walked, people didn't just stare in curiosity. They stepped aside, giving him space. He understood now. The trials weren't just about survival or strength. They were about forcing him into their world, into a bond that could never be undone. And whether he wanted it or not, he was now part of it. The camp was alive with movement after the binding rite. Warriors trained, traders moved through the central paths, and curious eyes followed Ethan wherever he went. But now, those eyes no longer looked at him with suspicion alone. There was also recognition, even a hint of respect. The mark Lyra had left on his neck was visible to everyone. It was proof that the bond had been sealed, and no one could challenge it without risking the tribe's wrath. Still, Ethan could feel the weight of what had happened. He sat near the edge of the camp, away from the noise, turning a small stone over in his hand. His mind wasn't on the trials or the victory. It was on Lyra, and what this bond meant for both of them. Lyra approached quietly, her steps barely making a sound. She stopped a few feet away, watching him for a moment before speaking. You're different now, she said softly. Ethan looked up. Different how? In their eyes, you're no longer an outsider. You're my mate. That means you have power here, and enemies. He smirked faintly. I think I already had one or two of those. She shook her head. Now it's more dangerous. Varric won't stop just because the bond is sealed. If anything, he'll want to prove the elders made a mistake by accepting you. Ethan tossed the stone aside and stood. Then I'll be ready for him. But before either could say more, a loud horn echoed through the camp. The sound was deep and urgent, making every warrior freeze in place. Within seconds, shouts rang out, scouts returning from the forest with news of an approaching threat. Ethan caught fragments of their words as they rushed past. Scavenger beasts. Too many. They're coming straight for the camp. The elder appeared, his voice sharp and commanding. Everyone to defensive positions. Protect the young and the wounded. Warriors scrambled to grab weapons, forming lines along the outer edge of the camp. The tension in the air was sharp enough to feel. Lyra turned to Ethan. You should stay inside the inner circle. He shook his head. Not happening. I'm not letting them think the human hides while they fight. Without waiting for permission, Ethan grabbed a spear leaning against one of the tents. It was heavier than what he was used to, the balance strange in his hands, but it would have to do. He followed Lyra toward the camp's outer defenses, where warriors were already positioning themselves. The sound of the beasts grew louder, a mix of snarls and pounding footsteps. Then they emerged from the tree line, massive creatures with thick, matted fur, long claws, and jaws that could snap a man in half. Their glowing eyes locked on the camp as they spread out, preparing to rush. Varric was at the front of the defenders, his expression fierce. When he saw Ethan arrive, he sneered. "Try not to get in the way, human." Ethan ignored him. The elder raised his staff, and with a single sharp word, the battle began. The beasts charged, the ground trembling under their weight. Arrows flew from the archers on the walls, striking a few, but barely slowing the rest. Ethan braced himself as one of the creatures lunged at the section he was guarding. He stepped to the side at the last moment, driving the spear into its side. The impact jolted his arms, but the beast roared in pain and collapsed. Another came at him almost instantly. This one was faster, its claws swiping dangerously close to his chest. Ethan dropped to a knee, stabbing upward into its exposed belly. Warm blood splattered across his arms as the creature fell. Around him, the fight was chaos. Shouts, roars, and the sharp clash of weapons. Lyra fought with a long, curved blade, her movements precise and deadly. She cut down two beasts in quick succession, but Ethan saw another coming from behind her. Without thinking, he grabbed a discarded spear and hurled it, striking the beast in the shoulder. It stumbled, giving her the moment she needed to finish it. Their eyes met briefly in the middle of the fight, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The battle dragged on, the defenders slowly pushing the beasts back toward the forest. Finally, with a final roar, the last of the creatures turned and fled into the shadows. The camp was littered with bodies, both beast and warrior, but they had held the line. Ethan stood catching his breath, the spear tip resting on the ground. His arms ached, his chest burned, but he was still standing. Varric approached, blood streaked across his armor. He looked at Ethan for a long moment, as if deciding whether to insult him or acknowledge his help. In the end, he gave a sharp nod. "You fight better than I thought, human, but this doesn't mean I accept you." Ethan just shrugged. "I'm not asking you to." The elder walked through the battlefield, surveying the damage. When he stopped in front of Ethan, there was something different in his eyes. "You stood with us today. That is not forgotten." Lyra came to stand beside Ethan, her hand brushing his lightly. "You've done more than survive the trials," she said quietly. "You've proven you belong here." But Ethan knew it wasn't over. Surviving the trials had earned him a place in the camp. Fighting beside them had earned him respect. Now, the real challenge would be living with the consequences of the bond and whatever dangers came with it. As the camp began tending to the wounded and rebuilding defenses, Ethan glanced toward the dark forest. The beasts were gone for now, but he had a feeling they weren't the only threat lurking out there. Night fell over the camp, but it was not a night of rest. The fires burned brighter than usual, the smell of cooked meat mixing with the sharp scent of herbs used for healing. Warriors nursed wounds, children clung to their parents, and the air still carried the memory of the battle. Ethan sat near one of the larger fires, his arms and chest aching from the fight. He cleaned the dried blood from his hands, staring into the flames, lost in thought. Lyra approached quietly, carrying two wooden cups filled with a warm spiced drink. She handed one to him without a word and sat down beside him. For a while, they drank in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Today, you saved more than just me. You saved the camp. They will never forget that." Ethan glanced at her. "And Varric?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Even he cannot deny what you did, but don't expect him to be friendly. His pride is too deep for that." Ethan chuckled quietly, then stared back into the fire. "You know, when this all started, I thought it was just some misunderstanding. A bite, a joke, something we'd laugh about later. But now," he shook his head slowly, "now I'm part of something I never planned for." Lyra's expression softened. "Neither did I, but maybe that's not a bad thing." Before he could respond, the elder appeared from the shadows. His staff tapped against the ground as he approached, stopping just across from them. "Human," he began, his tone formal, "your trials are over. You have passed the tests of the wild, the tests of strength, and the test of the bond. You are no longer just a guest here. By our law, you are one of us." Ethan didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. The elder's eyes moved between him and Lyra. "But understand this, the bond is not just protection. It is responsibility. You share her status, her allies, and her enemies. Whatever danger comes for her will come for you as well." Ethan met his gaze evenly. "I already figured that out." The elder gave a slow nod, then turned and walked away. Lyra sipped from her cup, her eyes thoughtful. He's warning you because things are changing, not just between us, in the whole tribe. You being here changes politics, power, even the way other clans will see us. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Because I'm human? Because you're an outsider who became part of the ruling bloodline, she explained. That has never happened before. Some will see it as strength, others will see it as weakness. The firelight flickered across Ethan's face as he considered her words. Then we make sure they see it as strength. Later that night, as most of the camp finally began to sleep, Ethan found himself restless. He walked to the edge of the camp, where the forest loomed dark and quiet. The stars above were sharp and bright, more than he had ever seen back on Earth. For the first time, he felt a strange pull, not just to survive here, but to protect it. Footsteps sounded behind him, and he turned to see Varric. The green-scaled warrior stopped a few paces away, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Varric said, "I still don't like you. But today, you fought well. You saved lives. That matters more than I want to admit." Ethan smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." Varric's eyes narrowed. "Don't mistake respect for friendship, but I won't challenge your place here again, not unless you give me a reason." Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Ethan watched him go, then returned to the fire where Lyra still sat, waiting. She looked up at him. "What did he say?" "That I'm not his friend, but I'm not his enemy anymore either," Ethan replied. Lyra gave a small nod. "That's enough for now." They sat together in the warmth of the fire, the night stretching quietly around them. For the first time since the trials began, Ethan felt the tension in his chest loosen. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something here, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. As the firelight danced in her eyes, Lyra leaned slightly closer. "You know, in our culture, the bite wasn't just a claim. It was also a promise." Ethan tilted his head. "A promise for what?" "That we face everything together, no matter what comes." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached out and took her hand. "Then I guess I'm keeping that promise." Far in the forest, something howled, a deep, echoing sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Whatever it wasn't part of the earlier attack. Lyra's hand tightened slightly in his. "They'll come again," she murmured. Ethan's jaw set. "Then we'll be ready." The night was calm again, but the promise in his words hung heavy in the air. The trials were over, but a new chapter had begun, one where survival would not be his only goal. Now he had someone to fight for, a place to defend, and a bond that could never be broken.